Please open your Quran to chapter number 38, verse number 29. Chapter 38, Surah Bad, verse number 29.
Which Surah Al-Sad? 38.
Chapter 38, verse number 29. For the love of our fourth Imam, As-Sajjad, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كتاب أنزلناه إليك مبارك ليدبروا آياته وليتذكر أولو الألباب آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
Thank you for joining us for this session on Taddabur of the Holy Quran. Taddabur means to ponder upon the Holy Quran. The root word suggests that we are able to see something that we otherwise would not have been able to see. The root word of dubur means that which is behind, with your back. So when I'm looking at my brother here, I can't see what is behind. I can't see his back. Taddabur is that practice of thinking, reflecting, pondering upon something that you are able to then see. In case you didn't know, the brothers had arrived. So good. Thank you. Thank you very much. If I can review and walk you a little bit, then it's going to start. I have to be able to do it. Thank you for your kindness. Taddabur means that you think and reflect deeply on a matter, on the Quran, such that you are then able to see and perceive what you otherwise wouldn't have been able to see ordinarily. So it is like me saying, right now, I can see the front part of you, your body. The back is hidden. What do I have to do to be able to see the back of me? Well, either you would have to turn around, or I would have to be able to be in a position to be able to see something that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see. Taddabur is that act of the mind that reflects and illuminates and shows you what you otherwise have not seen of the ayah that you are reading. Taddabur is an art that has many, many different techniques. And that the more we become acquainted with thinking about the Quran, the more we hone those skills, the more we will be able to elucidate what otherwise we would not have ordinarily been able to see of those verses of the Quran. The verse that I've asked you to have a look at is one of several where the Quran tells us that the purpose of revelation, the reason why Allah has revealed the Quran is for it to be pondered over. Very important. Most people think that the Quran is there simply to be recited. Many people think that the Quran is there to be recited in a beautiful tone or with the correct tajweed. Thank you very much. That is not the goal of revelation. The goal of revelation is to elicit reflection and pondering and to make the mind reflect over the ayat. Meaning, if we are reading without reflection or listening without reflection, we have not fulfilled the objective of the Quran itself. Have a read of the verse. Surah Sad, chapter number 38 of the Quran, verse number 29. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kitabun, a book. Anzalnahu ilayka, which we have revealed to you. What type of book is it? Mubarakun, blessed, abounding in good. Why? لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ, that you may ponder over its verses. In the Arabic language, that lam, لِيَدَّبَّرُوا, the lam is a causative lam. It is a reason. It's giving you the reason for something. Why have we revealed the book to you? لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ, that you may ponder upon the Quran. If you are listening to the Quran, reading the Quran without pondering, you have not fulfilled the objective of the Quran. It is to elucidate, what's the word? Elicit thinking over the Quran. And that is what we want to be able to reflect on this evening, inshallah. What we're going to do tonight is just think about how we can do a little bit of Taddabur. Our goal is to introduce ourselves to one or two techniques that we can use by way of trying to practice our Taddabur. So I'm going to introduce to you some terms, some points of reference, and please note them down. Write them down in your phones, in your notes, so that you have them as points by which you can return back to. Number one, there is a difference between pondering and making up your own ideas. Most people worry that if they're going to think about the Quran, that it's not something that we can do as laymen. The opposite is true. We are encouraged to do Taddabur. We are demanded to do Taddabur. But like any other skill set, like any other thing we are encouraged to do, it is to do it within a framework. You get to drive, you don't get to drive down the wrong side of the road. Fair? Same way, when we are encouraged to do Taddabur, it is not that we just get to make up what we want about the verses. We have to make sure that we have some boundaries to how we do it and what we do. The opposite is called tafsir bil-ra'i. That's the term that is mentioned within the books of Ahadith. Tafsir bil-ra'i is to give a meaning to the verse from our own predilections, our own biases. Which we can't do, because then everybody can do it. If you get to be able to say the verse means this, then anybody else also gets to say the verse means this. So we have to remain away from tafsir bil-ra'i and make sure that we remain within the boundaries of what is Taddabur. And we mentioned to you on a previous night that the Quran has what's known as Zahir, that which is apparent. In the same time, there are verses which are mutashabih, Zahir is a verse that when you read it at face value, you understand what is being said to you. Mutashabih is a verse that when you read it at face value, you don't understand the basic message that is being conveyed to you. Does that make sense or doesn't make sense? Let me give you a simple example. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say, Allah is one. For you, is that verse Zahir, Muhkam, clear, or Mutashabih, ambiguous?
It's clear. Both Zahir
one?
and Muhkam. Both Zahir and Muhkam. In many ways. I mean,
It's
on
both
the face
Zahir and
of
Muhkam. I'm
Yeah.
using these words interchangeably.
Right.
I've said, is it Muhkam? Is it clear to you?
It is, yeah.
What is the meaning of قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ?
It says like on the face of it, there is no God. I mean, there's one God.
So,
Yeah.
can I interpret, reflect on that verse and say God is two, God is three? No, because the verse is so clear, at face value, a prima facie reading of it, you understand what is being said. You are allowed to ponder over such verses. Let me give you another one. Allah says in the Quran, La taqrabu zina. Do not approach zina. Is it clear or unclear what's being said?
It's clear.
You can ponder over such ayat. Open the Qur'ans if you will. To chapter number 24, Surah An-Nur. Verse 61. Chapter number 24, Surah An-Nur, verse number 61. Does everybody have the ayah?
Yes.
Yes, read it with me in the English. There is no blame on the blind man, nor the blame on the lame, nor is there blame on the sick, nor on yourselves that you eat from your houses, or your father's houses, or your mother's houses, or your brother's houses, or your sister's houses, or your paternal uncle's houses, or your paternal aunt's houses, or your maternal uncle's houses, or your maternal aunt's houses, or what you possess the keys of, or your friends' houses. It is no sin if you eat together or separately. What's this verse referring to? Hands up, how many people know at face value what this verse is trying to convey? Hands up. No, for sure. Like you can read it and you go, yeah, that's at the same level as when you said, I understand قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. At the same level as when you said, I understand the meaning of La taqrabu zina. Does this verse make sense to you? Yes or no?
No.
No. This verse is then mutashabih. You don't understand it. It is allegorical. It is ambiguous. It is unclear to you. Can you ponder upon something that is unclear to you? No. Ahsant. So the rules to Taddabur, the first one is you have to do Taddabur and not Tafsir al-Ra'i. You do not get to be able to put your own predilections into it, your own assumptions into the meaning of a verse. Number two, you can only do Taddabur of that which is Zahir or Muhkam for you, clear, unambiguous at face value, and you cannot do Taddabur of a verse that is Mutashabih, that at face value you do not understand. What would you have to do if you come across a verse that is Mutashabih?
You have to look at the tafsir.
Tafsir.
Ahsant. You have to make it Muhkam. Muhkam is clear. If a verse is Mutashabih, you have to make it Muhkam. How do you do that? You can go to the tafsir. You can ask someone who knows. You could try to read why the verse was revealed. You could try to read what the context of the verse is. Whatever it requires in order to move the verse from being mutashabih allegorical, unclear, to being muhkam, zahir, and clear. Everybody's with me? Everybody's with me or you're not with me?
We're with you.
If you're really with me, give me a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali.
Okay, that was a loud salawat. I think everybody's with me. When we have a zahir verse, we are then permitted to be able to reflect on it, and we then have to try to go deeper and deeper and deeper into it in order to extrapolate various different reflections on it for ourselves. Reflection has a number of different techniques. Pondering has a number of different techniques. I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, sister is going to write down some things that I'm going to ask her to write, and it will help us to show us various different ways by which we can reflect on something. Number one, we can reflect on a word within the ayah. You can write these down as well for yourself if you want. We can reflect on a word within an ayah. We can also reflect on the entirety of the ayah itself. We can reflect on the relationship between one part of the ayah and another part of the same ayah. So sometimes an ayah starts with one issue and then it moves to another, or it starts speaking about one thing and it moves to another. And you can reflect on the relationship. Why? What is the relationship between this part of the ayah and the other part of it? You can reflect on what's called the siyaq. S-I-Y-A-Q, siyaq. Hands up, who knows what the siyaq is? The siyaq of an ayah is the coherence between the preceding and the subsequent ayat. So when Allah mentions something, you can look 2-3 verses before, one verse after, and see in its group of verses, what is God talking about? You can reflect on those who originally received the ayah. How do you think they understood that ayah at the original moment or times of receiving the verse? How did the Prophet feel when he received that word? How did the companions understand the verse in their context? What did it mean to them? Similarly, you can try to put yourself, this is another technique, put yourself into the verse as if you were receiving the verse 1400 years ago. How would that verse have made you feel if you received it 1400 years ago? Or you can try to think about the verse from a perspective of today. What is the meaning of that verse for you today? In your own given context, in your own given time. Similarly, you can think about the verse in the context of the future. How do you think the next generation ought to understand that verse? Or you can think about the ayah or the group of those ayat in the context of the whole surah itself. The surah as a coherent chapter is trying to address a certain topic or a certain issue or a certain theme. How does this verse relate to the entirety of the surah? Another one. I don't know if sisters, am I being too fast?
No,
You're okay?
A lot.
Excellent.
Okay, keep going, please.
Maybe one more. How does this verse relate in the stage of the growth of the Muslim community? For example, earlier in tonight's majlis, I gave you one ayah about where the wealth of the ummah was supposed to go at a certain moment in the first year after Hijrah. You remember that?
Yes.
What was the verse?
73.
Ahsan. What did the verse tell them? Where was the money supposed to go?
Muhajirin for Ansar to Muhajirin.
Ahsan. The Muhajirun didn't have their business contacts. There was need of investment in them as refugees, as migrants to the city. So for that moment, those months, Allah told the Ansar, place your money, invest them in the Muhajirin, get them on their feet, get them to be independent financially, contributing to the income, not a drain on the income or on the economy, so that you can all flourish together. You all remember that? And then we get another verse. What was the verse? Chapter number 9, verse number?
60.
60. And now we go from one category of where the investment needed to go to 8 categories of investment where the community needed to go. So sometimes we have to see the verse in the context of the development of the community. Where does this verse place itself? Is it in year 1, year 4, year 7, year 20 of the movement? And once I realized that, I can actually understand what the community was going through at that moment for Allah to have revealed that verse then to them. And I can try to reconstruct what was going on 1400 years ago. What other verses talk about what happens before that verse? Where then does the Quran tell the community to go? In the subsequent verses, in the subsequent chapters. These are all different techniques of Taddabur, and in fact, there are several more. All I'm doing is just giving you a little example so that you have some context behind what we're going to do now, inshallah. Are there any questions on these 7, 8 different techniques? Sister? Alaykum salam.
Well, a lot of times, I don't know, sometimes I open up the door on the page, and it kind of depends, I reflect upon it, is that like people from a lot of them guidance for some type of sign?
Tadabbur is for you personally. It's for you to understand the meaning of the Quran for yourself. So it's not Allah necessarily guiding you or not. It's for you to do, for you to understand the Quran and try to extrapolate those meanings for yourself in your context for your life. Does that help? So you put yourself into those verses, or you try to put the Prophet into those verses, or you try to put the companions into those verses and see it from a very real perspective. Open the Qur'ans to chapter number 18, Surah Al-Kahf, I think verse number 6.
I do have a question. So to be clear, we are seeing what you said, you called it Tafsir Bil Ra'i or Tafsir Al Ra'i?
Tafsir bil Ra'i.
Bil Ra'i,
It's for
okay.
you to put your own predilections.
Right. So are we this is Tafsir Bil Ra'i, is that what we are doing right now? When you're reflecting Tadabbur, you can draw your own conclusion from the ayat based on and the context of history, especially in the context of the present and the future. You like saying, like you said.
I'll explain inshallah further as we go.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you
Sorry.
so much.
Surah
Surah Al-Kahf,
Surah
chapter
Al-Kahf.
number 18, verse number 6.
6.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فلعلك باخع نفسك على آثارهم إن لم يؤمنوا بهذا الحديث أسفا. Maybe you will die out of grief, die from sorrow, grieving after them if they do not believe in this announcement. Okay, first things first. For you, is what Allah is saying, is it zahir, is it muhkam, or is it mutashabih? Which one? Give me the verse.
Mutashabih.
You will almost die out of grief, withering away, because they do not listen to this announcement. Is it muhkam or mutashabih for you?
Mutashabih.
Hands up, for whom is it mutashabih? And for whom is it muhkam? I love this little girl. Right there. How old are you?
It's Samira.
I understand why it's mutashabih for you. Bless you. Inshallah, when you're 4, it'll be muhkam. Okay? But hands up, who it's muhkam for? Who at face value understands what is being said? Okay. So what do you have to do if it's mutashabih? Go to the tafsir. Okay, so let's do this tafsir together. Who is being addressed? When it says, it's as if you will die out of grief.
It's the prophet. The prophet.
Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. You will almost die out of grief because of how much you want them to be guided. Okay. Now, having me explained it a little bit, is it still mutashabih or is it muhkam for you?
It's muhkam.
It's muhkam. What do you take away from this verse to prove that it's muhkam for you? What do you think? What's being said in this verse at a prima facie level that makes you understand what is being said? Just explain the verse to me like a child comes up to you and says, Mama, Baba, what does this verse mean? How would you explain? You know, they say, if you can't explain something to a child, you don't understand it yourself. Have you heard that phrase?
Yeah.
Yeah? I mean, what do you think? What's this verse saying? Just at a prima facie level, speak to me as if I was a child, which I am, with lots of grey hair. How would you explain just a face value meaning of this verse? What's going on?
Allah is telling our holy prophet on him.
Loudly so everyone can hear.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling our holy prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be on him, that if people, for example, are not heeding his message and are not agreeing with it or converting to it, perhaps don't grieve, because out of your grief you could pass away because you're so saddened by this.
So it might be that you will die out of grief because of you wanting them to listen and heed this message. Is it muhkam or is it mutashabih for you?
Muhkam.
Muhkam. Now that it is muhkam, you can reflect on it. Okay? If it was remaining mutashabih and you didn't understand the prima facie reading of it, you can't reflect on it. Once you understand it, you're in a position, shara'an, Islamically, legally, to be able to think about what's being said. Now, you have, as an example, 8 different ways that you might want to reflect. Let's pick one. Putting yourself into the verse, putting the prophet into the verse, that's one of the techniques, correct?
Can you just do us a quick favor? What is the risk? Say, for example, someone does not actually understand the verse and they begin to reflect on it. Is there any risks in doing that?
The risks of trying to reflect on something that we don't understand is that if we don't understand it and we start to try to extrapolate meaning from it, then we've already started to go in the wrong direction. We've already misunderstood the verse, and then we're going in the wrong direction of the verse. So what's the outcome of that? The outcome is that we will misinterpret the meaning, we will abuse the meaning, we will take from it what is not being stated. So the risk is there, and that's why we have to make sure that we understand the meaning of the verse. Sometimes verses are so evident to you, so obvious, they'll never need a tafsir. Sometimes verses are very kind of convoluted, you don't know whom is being addressed, why it's being addressed. That's when we have to, it's wajib to go to the tafsir or ask someone with knowledge to make sure that we clarify the meaning of it. And then we are able to do tadabbur. Otherwise, we'll go in the wrong direction. So does that answer the question of risk? Thank you very much for asking. I want you now to take the technique of just trying to understand the Prophet in this verse. Imagine the Prophet is sitting next to you and he recites this ayah. And you sat there and you were like, wow, God is saying this about my Prophet? What does that mean about him, his personality, his soul? What does it mean? And you just thought about the Prophet. In order to answer sister's question, whenever we think about the ayah, our thoughts have to be in line and be capable of going back to the apparent of the verse itself. The verse has some apparent features. It's addressing the Prophet. It's not addressing Muawiyah. It's addressing the Prophet. So we know it is about him, his station, his soul, his personality. I cannot then make it about someone who is not or not of that daraja of the Prophet. It is telling us how he feels, the reality of how he feels. Not only the outside, but what's going on internally inside the Prophet. That when people rejected him, when they threw trash at him, when they used to throw feces at him, when they used to throw the intestines of sheep at him, when they used to try to assassinate him, when they rejected him and called him a liar and a magician and a soothsayer, all of these different types of rejections, this is what happened to our Prophet and how he truly felt. Look how accurately, in the space of one line, Allah captures what is going on in the heart and the soul of the Prophet. لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ أَثَرِهِمْ. You are so affected by their rejection of you, their hatred of you, it is as if you will die out of grief. Imagine now, your Prophet is sitting here, and you were with him, and he recited this ayah from Jibreel. And you just sat there for a minute and you thought to yourself, SubhanAllah, this is telling me something about my Prophet which previously I didn't truly appreciate. So long as your reflection remains within the dhahir of the verse, fits within the apparent meaning of the verse, in principle, your reflection is accepted. It's correct. Okay? The moment we try to stretch the meaning of the verse, the moment we start applying it in ways that are inconsistent to the apparent meaning, to what is it a prima facie reading, this is when we start to tread the dangerous waters of potentially going into tafsir al-ra'i and going into the risks of actually making up something and going in a direction and trying to attribute meaning to the Quran that is not what the Quran is seeking from you and I. We have to make sure we stop. Be disciplined in our thinking. Stay within the parameters of the apparent of the verse. Everybody with me? Have I not explained? Is there anyone who doesn't understand what I've said and you just need to repeat it or explain it in a different way?
I understood everything that you explained, but can you explain this in an easier ayat, like something like?
We're going to work on putting yourself and trying to understand the Prophet in this ayah. Reflect on it. Yeah. So help me now to reflect on this ayah of the Quran. That the Prophet is so aggrieved. God himself testifies, you will almost die out of grief because of how much you want them to be guided. Okay. Let's think about it together. Think about it for a minute. What do you think this ayah is telling you about your Prophet?
It's a huge reflection on the personality of the Prophet.
Absolutely, it is. Give it a minute. Just think about it. And think about what you have learned about the Prophet in this verse that you wouldn't have otherwise known, or what is it that you think is being told to you about the Prophet himself? Okay, so what I'm going to do is invite a few different reflections from you. Ask you to tell us, what are you reflecting on in regards to the Prophet himself? And then I want you to pay attention as much as to the ideas that are coming forth, as much as making sure it remains within the apparent of the verse itself. If any of us feel that the reflection is starting to push the meaning of the ayah too far, or is actually outside the apparent of the meaning, then we need to note that as well, and make sure that we hold ourselves to account to remain within the zahir of the ayah itself. Okay? So sister, you had your hand up. Would you like to contribute? What's a reflection about the Prophet in this verse?
He worries so much about his own believers. He doesn't want them to go astray.
Wonderful. Okay, I think two things we can pick up on. Number one, the Prophet is compassionate. Yes? How compassionate?
He's a compassionate leader. He doesn't want his believers to go astray. He worries if the believers are actually trying to.
Brilliant. So we'll come to the believers bit in a second. Let's really work on this. In light of the ayah itself, how compassionate is the Prophet?
Extremely.
I'm asking sister, because you made the first offer. How compassionate?
That he would die if that doesn't happen.
How extremely compassionate? Let me reword the question.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's what you want. This is
When we try to imagine the most compassionate person, who is the most compassionate, caring person for you in your life? Your mother. God forbid you went astray. How sad and aggrieved would your mother be for you? Compare it to this. Would mom almost die out of grief?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
If die out of grief? If someone left the religion, does someone's mother die out of grief?
No, they wouldn't die, but
Yes or no?
no.
Yes or no? Be honest.
no.
Many of us have seen our own friends, family, maybe we left the deen for a long time in our lives. Yes or no? We stopped praying, we didn't go to the mosque, God forbid, we did a lot of haram. Yes or no? Many people. Did your mothers almost die out of grief? Yes or no?
No.
But they cared for you the most. Yes or no?
Yes.
So how compassionate is the Prophet?
More.
How much more than the mother?
Much more.
Can you see how compassionate the Prophet is? If you imagine the compassion that you have for your own children, if you imagine how compassionate your own mother is for you, you still cannot compare it even to the Prophet's compassion. Let's go to the second part. And make sure, remember, you have to be very accurate because this is Taddabur of the Quran. Sister, the second thing you mentioned was compassion for the believers. Reread the verse for me, sister. What does it say? Read it in English so that everybody hears. Read it out loud.
Maybe you would fight yourself to death with the following after them if they do not believe in this message.
If they do not believe. So who is his grief and his compassion for? The
The
believers or the non-believers?
Non-believers.
Non-believers. This is a very important. So we have to be very accurate. Remember, I said it has to match with the dhahir of the verse. So this verse is not about the believers. There are other verses about the compassion of the Prophet for the believers. That's a separate verse. I'll come to it. I'll show you it if you want it in a minute, or after we focus on it. This, sister, is about whom? Believers or non-believers? Non-believers. Look at the extent of the compassion that the Prophet has for the non-believers. Okay. Tell me, how extreme in his compassion, overwhelming in his compassion is he for the non-believers? Almost died. The Arabic, لَعَلَّكَ. It is almost as if he would die. Now tell me something. Again, we're going to stick within the dhahir of the verse. Hands up, how many of you seen someone who is almost dying? In your life, have you ever sat with someone who is almost dying? Tell me, what is their state like? Describe their state.
They're holding on to their every breath. They are conserving every bit of energy. They are hoping for the best. They are looking for their loved ones.
State physically would you see them in? Are they in a state of strength or weakness?
Weakness.
Are they worried or not worried?
No.
The Prophet is being told, you will almost die. Do you know how close you are coming to death? This is how much your heart loves these people. In your mind's eye, I want you to imagine the Prophet on his musalla, on his sajjada. What state do you think he would be in that moment in regards to this verse? Just describe it for me. Son, he would be crying in his sujood. What do you think he'd be saying to God? Oh Allah, guide them. What else would he be saying?
Give me the strength to guide.
Please show them the right path. What else would he be saying?
Yeah. Provide me the strength to guide.
Give me the strength and the ability to guide them. Why?
He's worried about it.
Because that's my job. That's what you put me in creation for. I'm supposed to guide them. Tell me something. If the Prophet wasn't able to guide someone based on this verse, is he feeling stressed, guilty, like he's not succeeding? Yes or no?
Yes.
So why was it affecting the Prophet? Again, back to the dhahir of the ayah. What is the Prophet feeling in this ayah? Failure. Not at a dunyawi level, like I've lost my investment. What type of failure? Letting down? God, I haven't fulfilled what you wanted me to do. And he's fearing that the kuffar will end up where? Jahannam. He's weeping over them because he's how compassionate?
Extremely.
And so he doesn't want them to end up where?
In Jahannam.
Can you see what this ayah is telling you?
Yeah.
He cares so much that he's weeping and crying over his enemies. Okay, let's go further in reflection. How hard then do you think the Prophet would work to actually get his enemies to come to Islam?
Extremely
If you're
hard.
feeling, we're using the word because we understand it, a failure. The Prophet would probably never imagine him failing, but you understand what we mean by that word, right? And the Prophet is worried about their akhirah. And he's crying on his musalla. And in sajda begging God. Follow-up question. How hard do you think the Prophet worked
Very hard.
to be able to go and get them to Islam? How hard?
Restless.
Restless. I like that. That's a brilliant word.
Mm.
He would be restless. Describe a scene in your mind where the Prophet will be restless. Give an example.
In every effort, every moment, every opportunity he would get, he would just dedicate it to guide, morning, evening, night.
I want you to imagine the Prophet is lying on his bed and he can't sleep in the middle of the night. What would he be doing?
Thinking about how.
Thinking about how,
What he will do.
what he can do better, what he will do next, whom he could go to next in order to be able to get a little conversation going. I'll tell you a story about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. The Prophet was gifted a beautiful, thick, red abba by one of his companions. Now, what I mean by that is that in Arabian desert, when it gets cold, the Arabs would wear thick abba in order to protect them from the wind. I don't know if you've seen some of the thicker Iraqi abaya, Yemeni abaya, it's like this. He was gifted a thick red cloak. What would a person who is crying over his enemies, wanting his enemies to be guided, what would a person do with that item?
Give it to his enemy.
Give it for what purpose?
To melt their hearts, to make them.
As a
When-
means
yeah.
of opening the conversation, as
Yes.
hopefully just a way to bring them two together. One step. The narration says, he knocks on the door of his enemy Abu Jahl.
No.
Abu Jahl, this is a gift for you. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot.
Let's try.
Maybe we can find some time to talk with one another. In order to facilitate that, here is the gift. It's a beautiful, thick, expensive red cloak. I gift it to you. You know what Abu Jahl did? Slammed the door in the face of the Prophet. فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. You will almost die out of grief, withering away at the fact that these people will not accept the announcement from God. Can you see what Taddabur does? You are going further and further and further into the apparent of the verse in order to understand it. In order to truly see what you otherwise wouldn't have seen. What did I say the meaning of Taddabur was? The root word? Dubar, the back. So you see the ayah. But the idea is for you to arrive at something that you otherwise wouldn't have seen of the ayah. Can you see something about your Prophet which 20 minutes ago you may not have truly appreciated about him?
Yes.
Okay. So that was all from Sister's suggestion. What else? Give me something else that you see about this ayah in regards to your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone else want to offer a tadabbur or reflection, Sister?
Yeah, I thought of a word that I don't usually think in the context of the Prophet, and that was vulnerable.
Wow, excellent.
Yeah.
Ahsan, why is it that previously you never thought of the Prophet as vulnerable and now you do?
Well, because we're always thinking of him as the best of creation,
Shuja,
Shuja, the strength, and resilience, and we're always thinking along those terms. But the fact that you almost die from grief for the people that Allah sent you toward, there's a kind of vulnerability, there's a softness in there that you thought of it, but not quite in this way.
Ahsan.
Yeah.
Tell me, does the word vulnerable fit within the dhahir of the verse? What do you think? Yes or no? Yes? It's important. Practice. We have to do Taddabur together. We're practicing and learning the technique. Do you think you can describe the Prophet as vulnerable through this verse? Yes, I agree. I think you can. It fits the dhahir of the verse, doesn't it? If you said describe the Prophet in one word in light of this verse, and you said it shows how vulnerable the Prophet is, how soft-hearted the Prophet is, how compassionate the Prophet is. All of those words, compassionate, vulnerable, soft-hearted, does it express the ayah? Yes. Does it fit within the apparent of the verse? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Therefore, it's accepted, it's correct. Excellent, lovely. A very nice reflection. Anything else?
I would say it also shows the love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for his prophet. He's
Brilliant.
warning him.
Explain this part.
Yeah. He's warning him that, you're caring so much that you're causing harm to yourself. Like he's showing that I love you so much, don't cause harm to yourself. I feel I could feel a connection between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the
Amazing.
Prophet.
So who is addressing the Prophet here in this ayah? Allah. When Allah addresses the Prophet, from what level, from what angle is Allah addressing the Prophet? What's the word that the sister used?
Compassion.
Tell me, is Allah showing compassion to the Prophet?
Yes.
Just think about that very carefully. You can look at it from the perspective of the Prophet's compassion, but you also see here Allah's compassion for his Prophet. Why is it Allah's compassion to the Prophet as well?
It's just it's showing that I see you, I see what you're going through.
I see what you're going through. Imagine if Allah had not appreciated, acknowledged what the Prophet is going through.
It strengthened him. I'm sure it strengthened him knowing that Allah he knows, of course,
Knowing
but
Allah is watching him.
yeah, that's it. That's what my reflection is.
Ahsan. Okay. I think that's incredible. Do you see it? So you see that the Prophet is from one angle, but in regards to the Prophet, you see how much love Allah has for his Prophet. How considerate. Now think about this as a question. When this is real speech, this is not poetry. When Allah says, I'm seeing that you will almost die out of grief. Is it possible that the Prophet would actually die out of grief? Yes or no?
No.
Is it not possible?
It's possible. Yes, it's possible.
Do we not see sometimes that people do die out of grief?
Yeah.
Is it not possible? It is. So is it possible for the Prophet to have died out of grief?
Yeah.
So before he gets to that point, what would be the duty of Allah to his Prophet? To do what?
Warn him, stop him.
To warn him, to stop him, to give him reassurance. Ya Rasulullah, it's okay. If you don't guide everyone, if you don't guide anyone, if only one person comes to Islam through you, it's okay. I am watching your efforts. I'm watching you. You've never put a foot wrong. So don't let your level of grief get to the point where you die afterwards. What does this mean?
What does it mean?
For the Prophet.
For the
Just for
Prophet.
the Prophet, between Allah and the Prophet. What are we seeing about the relationship from the other direction? From Prophet to people, we've talked about. Allah to the Prophet. What else are we seeing?
I think it gives this Prophet the strength to move on. Just like
Lovely. It gives the Prophet a strength to move forward. Because if he is so fixated on Abu Jahl's rejection of him, is he then going to go to the rest of humanity?
No.
The Prophet is being told here, move on now. Move forward. Don't be overcome by the Spirit. Tell me, everyone, does that reflection fit within the dhahir of the verse? Are you able to genuinely extrapolate that from the angle of how God is talking to the Prophet? Yes or no?
Yes,
Yes or no?
yes,
Then is it acceptable? Yes or no?
yes.
Now tell me, the same way you just learned more about your Prophet, what have you learned about your God?
How compassionate he is.
He is.
Yes.
If the Prophet is so compassionate to people, how Allah is compassionate to the Prophet? I understand it's tough for you, Ya Rasulullah. You've got a mission, you've got a duty. But don't let Abu Jahl's conduct stop you from the rest of your duties. Everyone with me?
Yes. I have a question.
Yes.
Could we take it a step further and put ourselves?
I wait.
No.
I was wondering. I know it's gonna stop.
Slow down.
Slow down, slow down.
Already went there.
I know.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. I think let's go there now. Okay. So everybody, you've reflected by putting yourself in the shoes of the
Prophet.
Prophet. Everybody with me? Is
Yes.
it too long? Is it too long for you?
No,
Can
this
we
is
carry
good.
on? Sure.
This is good.
Okay. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So as sister suggested, let's move from putting yourself in the Prophet's shoes to now putting yourself in the ayah. You with me?
Yes.
Okay. First things first, let's look at it as if you are the person in the ayah. So now Allah is addressing you. Take 1 minute and think about you in the ayah instead of the Prophet. Okay. Who would like to offer a reflection for themselves in relation to understanding this ayah? The ayah in its original is addressing the Prophet, but you are also the recipient of the Quran. You are also a reader of the Quran. So now you want to understand the verse for yourself, to benefit from it yourself. Tell me something as to how you would use the ayah for you, putting your shoes into that ayah.
Yes.
Sister?
I think it's a sense of reassurance that it's going to be lonely and painful because people will ostracize me.
What will be lonely and painful? Ahsant. Walking the path of Islam is necessarily going to be a lonely and difficult path. Can you extrapolate that from the verse?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes or no? I
Yes.
agree. It is a legitimate reflection. Why? If the Prophet is going to be lonely with all of his great characteristics, then subhanAllah, for me and you, it's going to be a lonely path when we're on the path of stuff.
To play devil's advocate, right? Could it be that this is in Mecca, right, where there's very few Muslims? Whereas in Medina, towards the end of the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's many more Muslims. And so, is that fair to say that it will always be a tough road to be on, ostracized, so on and so forth?
Can you ask me that question after we finish this section of Taddabur? Is that all right?
I'll try to remember.
Thank you. Thank you. May Allah bless you. Sister, anything further? let's come back to it. Both of you having a dialogue in the third section of the discussion, as long as you guys are not too tired. So the reflection might be that, look, if the Prophet gets lonely on this path, even you and I may get lonely on this path. Just as an FYI, who knows a hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam about loneliness on the path of Islam? Write this down. Hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha. لا تستوحشوا في لا تستوحشوا لا تستوحشوا في طريق لقلة أهله. Do not become forlorn, lonely on the path, even if it becomes so few of you. Imam al-Qudi tells us as an advice, don't let yourself become grieved. لا تستوحشوا في طريق لقلة أهله. It is in Nahj al-Balagha, if I recall. So what else do you take away for yourselves?
I have there's somebody in the back.
Wonderful. It shows us what the qualities of a true leader ought to be. What are those qualities? The perseverance, determination, compassion, soft-heartedness, patience,
Resilience, yeah.
resilience. Ahsant. So what would you do next in that reflection?
You know, collectively, everybody go together rather than you just.
Sure. If these are the qualities of a leader, what would be the question that you would ask for yourself?
Do I have
these?
Say them loudly. Do I have those qualities that the Prophet had? Am I compassionate to the non-believer? Am I compassionate to the believer? Let's be honest, how many leaders in our communities, you challenge them, you say one thing against them, and the door is closed forever. They lose their temper, they don't want to talk to you again, it becomes a big thing, you're not invited to the wedding, everybody becomes angry, families now have to become enemies of one another. Why? Just because he is not compassionate and she is not compassionate. True or not? Have you not seen it in your life?
Yeah.
I've seen it many times in my life. One person says something about me, I don't like that guy's lectures. Neither do I.
Neither do I.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't win every popularity contest. Like, you see what I mean? If I was hard-hearted, if I was closed off by criticism, then why are you in this position in the first place? A leader requires those qualities. So immediately, take it to its next level. Okay, Prophet's qualities, leader needs it. Do I have it? What's the next stage of that reflection for yourself?
How can I get it?
If I have them, do I do that?
I have to have it. I have to develop that in myself. The Prophet was this level compassionate. Now, I don't necessarily have to die out of grief every time someone doesn't like my lecture. Although I do feel like that. But at least when someone comes back with feedback, when someone comes back with criticism, with another idea, I have to be compassionate. I have to be as hardworking. I have to try to put myself to be able to spread the message in my way, within my capacity, like the Prophet did. Okay, let's go to the next one. Sister raised the issue of the relationship between God and the Prophet. So now take 1 minute and reflect, put yourself into the ayah, but not from the perspective of the Prophet, from the perspective of God talking to you in this ayah. Go, think about it for 1 minute. Okay. Who wants to make a reflection? Put
Can I try?
yourself in the ayah.
Yeah.
And imagine God is talking to you about you. What would be a reflection?
I'm thinking the conflict between your nafs and a higher purpose. This is like the Prophet had a purpose, which is why he faced everything that he did. I think we tend to crumble, like you said, because we're not committed to a higher purpose, the will of Allah. And the reason we tend to crumble is because, and we're just not dying, like the Prophet, Allah mentions of the Prophet, is because I think our ego, our nafs, tends to sort of take over at that point.
So what is God telling us in this verse? What is God telling the Prophet that directly would relate to my life, your life, our life?
The Prophet had a higher purpose and we don't.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So the Prophet had a purpose, and this is why when he felt like he wasn't achieving the purpose, he was so grieved. So we too should have a purpose that pushes us in our life. I love that. Very nice. Makes sense. So if we don't have that purpose, what are we supposed to do? Try to find that purpose. Excellent. What about sort of God's compassion for you in this ayah?
I feel
Just like Allah was compassionate with the Prophet, how compassionate is he with you? He's also compassionate to us as well. Are there times in our life when we feel like we failed?
yes.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Are there times when we put so much effort into something, but I still came up short? Yes or no?
Yes.
And does it break us inside?
Yes.
Yes.
And what does Allah seemingly in this ayah appear to tell us?
It's okay.
Reassuring.
Don't be so hard on yourself. On the condition of what? You've actually tried. Be patient. Don't worry if you need to move on and put your efforts elsewhere. Don't worry if you need to move on. Don't worry that you're brokenhearted. I'm here. I am watching. I am present in your life. Isn't it incredible?
Really is.
Think of how compassionate Allah was to the Prophet and how compassionate he is to you through the same ayahs.
Let's say you try something really good for society or for family or anything, then you fail. You don't get no revelation, right? So how do you?
You get revelation, it's right there.
You read the Quran and you do Taddabur.
By reflecting on it, by putting yourself into the ayah and making the ayah for you.
Feel the presence.
Instead of it being for the Prophet, abstractly for the Prophet, put yourself into the ayah and understand what God is telling you in this moment. Are you with me?
Yes.
Everybody with me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to move forward and then conclude because I don't want it to become too long that everybody gets tired. So that was the second suggestion. Now there's one more that we didn't write down. If you don't mind, sister, if you can add a ninth technique of Taddabur. And this is called Taddabur Mawdu'i. Taddabur Mawdu'i. Who knows what the word Mawdu' means?
Topical, subject.
Topic or subject. Taddabur Mawdu'i is the following. To collect ayat in regards to the same subject from across the Quran in order to be able to see various verses about the same topic. So what is the subject here?
Guidance, compassion.
What is the subject? The Prophet is the subject and his soft-heartedness or his vulnerability. Sister, you had your hand up. Sure? So what would we do? We would start to gather some verses that help us to populate that subject and see it from different angles. Hands up, how many of you play or enjoy a good jigsaw puzzle? A few of you. What do you do with a jigsaw puzzle?
You put all the
You
same.
put all the pieces together in the right way, and then it beholds a full.
Yeah.
It beholds a full. In the same way, when you gather ayat from across the Quran in regards to a subject, and you put
Explain
the
it.
pieces together, you behold the full.
Sure.
Okay. Do you know the verse? وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظًا. Had you been hard-hearted,
Yeah, they would have
what would have happened?
They would have pushed
Can you
away.
turn
run
to the
away.
verse?
Yeah.
Chapter number 3, verse number?
Chapter 3 is 20 verses.
Yes, it's okay to Google. Had you been hard-hearted, Quran, had you been hard-hearted, what is the verse number? Chapter 3, verse 100 and
159.
159. Please open your Quran to chapter 3, verse 159.
SubhanAllah.
Everybody has the ayah?
Yes.
Would you kindly read it loudly for us so all the brothers and sisters can hear? Yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is by Allah's mercy that you are gentle to them. Had you been harsh and hard-hearted, they would have surely scattered from around.
Can you see how this describes the Prophet?
Yes.
Is it a similar verse that legitimately links to the previous ayah? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you can use it. Turn to chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, verse 128.
One 28.
Chapter 9, verse 128. When you've all got it, just let me know. Just give me a little nod.
We have it. Or I have it.
Sister? Sister? Who was the previous verse that we, the first verse addressing the believers on the non-believers? Who agrees? Believers or? This
Non-believers.
verse addresses the Prophet's compassion to the
Believers.
Have a read of the verse. لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَءُوفٌ.
Rahim.
Certainly, an apostle has come to you from amongst yourselves. Grievous to him is your falling into distress. Is that about the believers or unbelievers? Now, yes, just think about this very carefully. If he's so upset about how disbelievers are, imagine how loving and compassionate he is about the mu'mineen that fall into distress. Look at what the verse says. Azizun alayhi. So distressed do you become when a mu'min falls into distress. Tell me something. How many of you have fallen into distress in your life? Give me an example. Health, family, wealth, education, every issue in life. Do you think that the Prophet is not aware? Do you think that Imam al-Mahdi is not aware? How grieved is he on your behalf when you fall into distress? How do you know that? Look at what the verse says. Azizun alayhi ma anittum harisun alaykum bil mu'minin. For the believers, he is this grieved. And what is he for the believers? Ra'ufun.
Rahim.
Is this verse legitimately another verse within the subject of the Prophet's compassion? Yes or no?
Yes.
Two more ayah, and I want to answer Brother Amin's. Turn a few verses back, same surah, chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah, verse 93. No, wait. Verse 79. My apologies. Verse 79. Another discussion under the same sort of rubric. The Prophet was mocked. The Prophet was attacked. And look how he felt. Yes? Have a read of this verse. الذين يلمزون مطوعين من المؤمنين في الصدقات. They who taunt those of the believers, who actually spend their sadaqat, and those who give to the extent of their earnings and scoff at the believers. Don't worry, Allah will pay them back for their scoffing. What's going on in this verse?
Now we are all happy because Allah is getting back at them.
Who's got your back in this verse?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Allah is saying, listen, when the unbelievers mock at you for you spending in the way of Islam, you putting into the causes of Islam, Allah, what does He do? Sakhirallahu minhum. Allah will pay them back for their scoffing. So if Allah is telling the believers, when you do good and people scoff at you for that, Allah will scoff at them back. What is it doing? Is it giving you confidence and surety?
Yes.
Will you die out of grief knowing that Allah has your back? Allah is going to scoff at them for them? Yes or no? Is it legitimately another verse that links to the tapestry of this issue?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Last ayah. My brother Amin asked a very pertinent question. Can you repeat your question loudly so everyone can hear?
No, the sister had mentioned in her interpretation of the ayah.
I don't want the word interpretation. I'll use the word reflection.
Reflection of the ayah. You said that perhaps on the path of righteousness, we will always be alone, or something to this effect. And to play devil's advocate, I said, well, is that fair? Perhaps this verse may have been revealed during the time of Makkah, where there were very few Muslims. But if this verse had been revealed during the time of Medina, where there are very many Muslims, perhaps that interpretation or that reflection may not be fair.
Wonderful. Do we have a verse of the Quran or a chapter of the Quran in Medina and Munawwara that describes the matter of the Prophet having an abundant number of people around him and what his feeling was or how he should react? That's the one. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. What does أفواجا mean? What's the word fawj?
Army, like armies.
Army.
Yeah.
They enter into Islam afwajan. Group after group after group is entering into Islam. What should you do? فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان. There's another way. Exactly. So when people were rejecting the Prophet en masse, he felt alone. And when the Prophet saw people coming in en masse, فسبح بحمد ربك. What should we do? Glorify God, give thanks to God, be elated with God. That this is. Can you imagine being so soft-hearted on the other side? Can you imagine how happy the Prophet was when people were entering into Islam? Excellent. So here, what we have done is we have talked about the technique of Taddabur. Let's just review and make sure we're all on the same page. Number one, Taddabur and not tafsir.
Right.
Ra'li. You cannot just make up whatever you want. Number two, you have to make sure the verse is muhkam and not mutashabih. If the verse is mutashabih, you have to make it. How do you make it muhkam? Look at the tafsir or ask someone who knows to give you the meaning of this ayah. then you can ponder upon it. Number three, when you ponder upon it, you have to make sure your reflection is within the boundaries of the zahir of the ayah itself. Number four, you have, Ya Allah, you have many different techniques by which you can do tadabbur. There are 9 different techniques here. If you want, write them down, take a picture of it, and when you read the Quran, inshallah, use one of these, 2 of these, 3 of these techniques in the same ayah and try to reflect for yourselves on the meaning of the Quran. Thank you all for your time. I hope it was a benefit. Please continue to practice your reflections on the Quran. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact me and I'll do my best to help you along the way as you're practicing your tadabbur. Please raise your hands, join me in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam to help us to perform tadabbur of the Quran. And we ask you, Ya Allah, grant us the ziyarah of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam fi dunya wal akhirah. Wassalamu alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In love of our Prophet and his soft-heartedness, please recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل فرجهم.
Tafsir has different merits, different